episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I'm your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about Ghost Heart by John Palisano. That's how I'm going to say it. This is from Sam Hain Publishing, and it's about vampires. Thank you. Good night. Okay, I guess I could go into it a little bit more. Ghost Heart is actually the story of Rick, who's just an average guy in what I think is a relatively small New England town. He works at his uncle's garage, hangs out with his friends, goes out drinking, does little drugs, trying to get laid. Just an average guy. Until this mysterious group of people shows up in town and Rick's life spirals out of control. People around him start dying. These new folks in town start hassling him. And the only bright spot is this new girl, Minaret, who Rick sort of falls in love with / becomes obsessed with. However you want to look at it. I guess it depends on your point of view. And so this is about Rick just trying to figure out what the hell's going on and just trying to survive. And vampires. So, I'm really torn on this book. First of all, Palisano's writing style is pretty straightforward. No big surprises in how he writes. And he sort of falls into that Sam Hain group. It's just most of their writers seem to be, not all, but most seem to be just very straightforward. Not as verbose as Stephen King or Clive Barker. Not as simple as some other writers, just sort of in that middle ground. Very, very decent, I guess, for lack of a better term. So you've got that. It's not a difficult book to read. Anyone knows me, I say this anytime I review something with vampires. I'm not a vampire fan, but Palisano does something very different with his vampires in this book. They're not the traditional vampires at all. They have a needle-like tongue that they use. They do have super strength, but they're not your traditional immortal vampires. The ghost heart of the title is actually a condition that has a bad effect on the vampires. And then there's also a little something extra that he adds to the vampire mythos, I suppose, at least his vampire mythos, a little surprise. So I like that there's a new take, a different take on vampires, which for me is good because, again, not a huge fan of those creatures. So that's good. Rick, I don't know. I really couldn't get behind the character, but I think that's probably because he's such an average guy. Excuse me. And I suppose it's a tribute to Palisano's writing that on the one hand, Rick is a decent dude. He works at his uncle's garage. He's responsible as far as that goes. He does his job. He's got some good friends, and he cares when bad things happen to those friends. On the other hand, when it comes to personal relationships, he's kind of a douche. When we first meet him, he's in a relationship with this woman that's cheated on him like 5 times. And I think he's cheated on her as well, and yet they're still in a relationship. I just don't get it. Then he meets Minaret, and like I said, either he's fallen in love or he's kind of obsessed. I personally think it takes time to fall in love with somebody, so I lean towards the obsession side. So when it comes to relationships with women, he's really just kind of an ass. Um, so I'm not sure how I feel about Rick as the main character, but again, I think it's actually quite realistic. I do know people like this, um, and people aren't just one thing. So you can have a character who's good in some aspects and who's just an idiot in other aspects. So I guess that's realistic as far as characters go. Uh, but as I said, I'm torn about the book overall, and there are some things about it that bother me. Um, One, I don't think there's a lot of vampire stuff going on. Uh, a lot of the things the vampires do, that those characters do, uh, could have been. They could have just been people. It could have just been uh, the story of a dude and his cronies who are just harassing some guy. Um, so it it just seems to be missing. I can't believe I'm going to say this. It needed more vampire. Um, and the story touches on some little things that it doesn't really that don't really pay off. Uh, there's one point where I got the impression that maybe like the police department has come under the influence of this group of vampires, and perhaps even a larger part of the town maybe has come under the influence, but it doesn't seem to go anywhere. Um, and there's another female character. I think her name was Lucy that Rick goes out with because he's broken up with that other girl again, the one that's always cheating on him. He catches her cheating again, so he breaks up. He goes out with this girl Lucy once, and then I don't think we ever see her again in the story after they've gone out this one time. Um, she just disappears, and Minaret's an interesting character. She's our entrance into the world of the vampires. Um, she's the person that we learn from. Uh, and she's got uh, a little bit of depth to her. There's a scene towards the end with her mother and some things that I really enjoyed. And there are some scenes that I enjoy. Overall, though, it doesn't really work for me. Uh, and part of that is something I try not to talk too much about continuity errors because they happen. But for me, there's a big one, unless I'm completely mistaken. I double checked, but it's always possible I missed something. Um, but this is something that spoiled basically the second half of the book for me because it kept pulling me out of the story. And basically, about halfway through, Rick is in a car accident, and then the vampire dudes beat the crap out of him. He ends up in the hospital, and he says that he has a couple of fractures in his right leg, a couple of fractures in his left arm, cracked ribs, a broken nose. Uh, he only mentions a cast on his leg. He says he's got a cast on his right leg that goes up past his knee. No mention of a cast on his arm for the fractures there. So he's in the hospital for a week, and then he's released. And from what I can tell, the rest of the story only takes place over a few days. At most, from the time he's in the car accident, gets beaten up until the end of the story, at most I'd say it's 2 weeks. And yet, except for that first day that he's out of the hospital where it mentions him being on crutches, there's nothing about his injuries except for talking about him dealing with pain. but he keeps doing things that I just can't see a person who's got almost a full leg cast doing, or someone with cracked ribs, or someone, again, I don't know why he doesn't have a cast on his arm. Um, he goes out and he's doing things, and as I said, it kept pulling me out of the story because every time he would do something, I immediately think, how is he doing this when he's got a cast on his leg, or where's the cast on his arm? There's a point where he and Minaret are out on the docks and they're sliding across the ice like kids. You run and you slide on the ice. And he's got a cast on his leg. How is he doing this? So there are quite a few things like that in the second half of the book. And it just kept pulling me out of the story, pulling me out of the story. And that spoiled it for me. I think if the detail of his injuries had been paid attention to more, I don't know. I think that would have helped a lot. But when something just keeps pulling you out, it's a bad sign. And half of the book was like that. So there are some good things. There are some decent characters. Rick, again, I think is a well-written character because he's got that dichotomy going on. Minaret's an interesting character. The little secret vampire-y thing that I'm not going to tell you was pretty interesting. But just some of the stuff that goes on, some of the threads, or some of the things that were hinted at but never pay off, really brought it down for me. So I was a little disappointed. I do love this cover. Love that picture. So basically, Ghost Heart for me gets 3 out of 5 Ghost Hearts. There you go. I did give it 3 because, again, there are some good things. But I really can't go any higher because the bad, at least the stuff that I see is bad. So it's not so bad that I won't try something else from Mr. Palisano. I just think a more critical eye towards the manuscript might have helped. But he does write well as far as style goes. He does have some interesting characters. He had some interesting ideas. Just not sure they really went anywhere. For a second, it almost had a Salem's Lot flavor with the whole sort of slow vampires taking over a small town, except, again, it didn't pay off. There was just a hint that maybe that was happening. So there you have it. I guess that's all I can say. 3 out of 5. Trying to cut down that. There we go. That's a little better lighting wise. 3 out of 5 Ghost Hearts, because the Ghost Heart makes your heart all gray. And I do like the idea of the Ghost Heart as a condition. But so, if you like vampires, if you want to see them in a different light, maybe give this a try. Other than that, I guess that's all I have to say. So this has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.